Dude, we are here.
We are here, Bill. It's hard to believe. Honestly, it really is.
It is hard to believe. It's interesting. I was actually just holding the book in my hand again, and I flipped to the back where it says, where it's published or where it got printed. And mine says, made in the United States, Troutdale, Oregon, June 28th, 2026. So I'm always curious to see where they get shipped from because mine, when they get printed, get sent from different locations depending on the order. So I'm curious,
Yeah.
the ones you have, were yours Troutdale, Oregon as well?
No, mine are Orlando.
Fascinating, right?
Yeah. Very interesting for sure.
Yeah. So to think about like even the concept of a book when it gets published, where it gets published, and how it makes its way to you. Now, I will say that I think I am holding the inaugural print edition because I think I might have been the first one to order it. Is that accurate?
I think you did of the many hundreds that have been ordered so far. So it's been a great response. I think you were the first one to actually send me a picture. I hadn't even gotten the chance yet to be able to do that myself because, as you know, like it's just a whole process, right? And
Yeah.
you think you finally get to that point, and then there's some other stumbling block, or oh, I forgot to do this thing, and there's a technical part of the publishing, and then there's a writing process and the design, and um, so many different times I felt like I was done, and there was always one more step. So what a trial and patience and perseverance. And like I have such a new appreciation for anybody that's written anything that they put out there in the public domain, from a PhD dissertation or
Mhm.
defense, MBA, just research, whatever. It's a fascinating process, daunting at times, quite honestly, as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. And we're gonna unpack this, but this is kind of a different episode. It's different than I would normally sort of have in the lineup, and it's partly because we're doing a bit of a kind of a midweek book launch celebration for you,
Yeah.
because this is your first book that you've put out in the world, and I kind of want to welcome you to the club that is published author. Um, and I've got the book here with me, and there's a couple sections that I'd love to sort of read and for us to chat through. But um, before we kind of jump into that, let's just back up a little bit and maybe paint a picture for folks how we even got to this place because you and I share a lot of things in common, including sort of being inside the cultures and companies, some of the largest cultures and companies in the world. But what's interesting is even still, our paths had never crossed
Yeah.
until you sent me a LinkedIn message. Do you want to sort of like back up and talk a little
Yeah.
bit about how this came together?
So, in the 30-second spiel of, who is Dave Pearlman aside from a recent aspiring author? Well, I can say author now, right? And I'll own that. But, um, spend time, went to college, didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, had an opportunity to go in the military, spent time in the Army, a couple years active duty, another 6 years in the reserves, finished up my uh, education, or at that time, my undergrad at State University in New York at Oswego. Had a great experience there. One of the people that's in the book was, I had an internship with a gentleman, and he actually up in the book later on with a gentleman named Bob Casper, who's the director of career services. And some of those transformative things stayed with me, right? And so I was always at that intersection of education, technology, healthcare, with a military component to it. And so, um, went to go work for a little company called Great Plains. We spent some time in the banking and oil industries. And literally, I was there 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 2 months, 3 months, right? And I was in, leadership role in a consulting practice. And lo and behold, we're getting bought by Microsoft. And I'm like, this is awesome, right? And you hear all these stories of people retiring when they're 26. And, I worked with a
Mhm.
lot of people that had some of those options. And um, despite, uh, you know, 10 years of the Microsoft stock price being 17 to $21, you know, it was advantageous long term. But, there was a lot of turmoil, right? As you're in a 1,500 person organization at the time. Eventually, I went to go work for the chief of staff for Doug Burgum, who went on to become governor and many successful careers, philanthropist, thought leader. And I think now he's in the current administration. but just some really unique experiences, right? That I could not in my wildest dreams make it up. And eventually I was doing consulting and a lot of it was around ERP stuff, which you also had a cross section of and spent, 20, depending on how you count the time, 23, 24 years between Great Plains and Microsoft. I don't know, 18, 19 different managers, probably 16 unique roles over that time period. People, not people, strategy, product, fielding large things a lot. My last probably 18 years were almost all exclusively in the public sector arena, right? So R1
Mhm.
healthcare, K through 12 higher ed, and just really kind of found my niche, right? I really had loved that. And I worked for another company called Lucian prior to that. And so, had this career at Microsoft. I was 50 something.
Mhm.
Maybe it was 40 something, but it was probably 50 something. And I was sitting out in Lake Tahoe on a family ski trip and I just said, I'm done. Like I am just done. The moons were aligning in different ways and the culture was starting to get more on the competitive end of things, which it always was, but we had a genteelness for a while.
Mhm.
And COVID just kind of burned me out. I was working 70, 80 hours a week for 10, 12 weeks, and I needed to make a change. And I was honestly getting ready to retire. Like I was done, right? There was enough that we could live and be pretty comfortable by most measures. And somebody from Adobe reached out to me out of the blue, honestly. And they were
Mhm.
starting a team and they hired me. And I've had 6 managers in 5 years, various org reporting, very unique businesses, but, it's always been kinda supporting that education, healthcare, and so I find myself again at a time of another change, right, which is kind of this time of AI,
Mhm.
so that intersection, right, I've always been a purveyor on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and then I had started this, book project probably just about 2 years ago to the day. And
Mhm.
so hired a couple of people to help with some social media, had a different company set up, started the writing process, which I'm sure we'll get into later. And
Mhm.
all of a sudden I kept seeing a lot of your stuff coming up in my feeds probably about 2 years ago. And I had gotten to a point with a group of people in this process where I had gotten everything that I could. They were very helpful in what I was doing, but I needed to get past where I was. And so that was like a year. And then there was some life gets in the way. Right.
Yeah.
And you and I continue this communication. I'm like, hey, and we joke because you were actually at Adobe and you were helping roll out our conversion to Microsoft Dynamics, which I spent seriously like 6 years of my life working on conversions to Dynamics. And the products have changed, but they haven't changed that much. Like it's still, chart of accounts, customer service, financials, customer, CRM or customer success, whatever you want to call it. And, I was just chuckling. And then you had made a post and um, I was flying back from somewhere. And I don't know if it was sitting in the Detroit airport and I was coming back from either Chicago or San Jose. I was on my way back to Hilton Head Island, and I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna call Bill. And I think I called you out of the blue. Like we exchanged a
You
couple of
did.
emails, started chatting, and you're like, hey, I'm getting ready to release this book, and so that turned into this conversation that kind of I think over the course of a year, just lots of change, right? And we're talking about AI and your background, some of the things that I'm involved in. And again, definitely work is not just work, right? We got to be passionate. We got to be engaged in what we're doing. And how do we find that passion? Because sometimes it's just process, right? And the process beats you down, beats you up. Doesn't become
Yeah.
an enabler, it becomes a hindrance. And so we're kind of working through that just from a kind of left brain, right brain perspective. And
Yeah.
I'd reached a point with a bunch of changes that were going on at Adobe, all good, right? But we were evolving very, very quickly. And we'll maybe talk a little bit more about that. And I said, had a couple things happen just more on the personal side where I was kind of stuck. Like I was just stuck. Had to get my head back in the right space. I had a completed manuscript. I'm pretty sure. And I
Mhm.
said, you know what, Bill, you've been through this a couple times. I need somebody to just read this thing, tell me what you think of it, and just give me no varnish. Like we knew each other pretty well, I would say, but we have never, to this day, we've never met in person.
No.
And you gave me some really good feedback. I think you were sitting. Where were you sitting?
I was at the Army Navy Club, the library at the Army Navy Club in
And
Washington, DC.
like I literally had just landed from somewhere, and you're like, you texted me and, "Hey, can I talk with you?" And we got on the phone and you kind of said where you were at and there was some history. You were sitting at like the Kennedy desk or
Yep.
something like that, which is, if you ever get a chance, it's a great club to go to. Ton of history, the people that have been through there. And you said, "Hey, I'm going to send you kind of my write up on what I think. Here's the high level." And I don't know if I had 220 pages or whatever the page number was. And like, I distinctly remember you saying, there's a lot of good stuff in there. Some stuff needs to change a little bit. Some of it needs some massaging. Have you thought about a couple of things? I'm like, you know what? This guy knows what he's talking about. And you wrote I still have the email of what you wrote in terms of the feedback on the book. And it was very well thought out, um, very insightful, a couple things that I hadn't thought about, and really helped me start to think about how do I take a lot of these stories, vignettes, outcomes, and find a common thread through that. So it was extremely helpful for me. And then I think we kind of reached an agreement,
Hmm.
for some trading kind and some other stuff. And you spent a couple of months working with me on
Yeah,
helping craft that last, I got to say, that last 5 to 7% of the book. Everything's written. And now everything you're doing is taking away. There's nothing additive, right? But
that's right.
yeah, finding a couple of those key paragraphs and a couple of key things. And there's a name for that. I think you define that editorial. What is it?
Developmental editor.
Yes. So you became a developmental editor. And then the other key part, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'll take a pause.
No, this is no, keep going. This is great because this is all
And
the
so,
unveiling of it.
you had gotten to this point where we probably spent 10 to 20 hours, maybe that's an exaggeration, on the phone on these kind of meetings over the course of maybe 3 to 4 months, right? And some of
Hmm.
it was just talking about the book, the process, the publishing piece, some of the things to think about, and then a whole bunch of other stuff was just like life and technology and a bunch of speaking engagements that we had. And I actually think I had you help me on a kind of semi volunteer project outside of this and present to some folks around AI. And you, I think we were pretty much done with the book. And then you on your own spent, I don't know how much time, but you basically read the author's forward that I had
Yeah.
written. And you sent it back to me in a WAV file. And I'm listening to it. And I was like, that's pretty, this sounds pretty damn good. Did I really write this? Like that, like it was one of
Yeah.
those things.
Yeah.
And I shared it with my wife, Kim. And this is my memory. She may have another one, but there were a few tears, over the author forward portion, not the dedication, just the author forward. And it really, those, I don't know, couple thousand words really brought it home. And I'm like, there's something here that I feel like I can be proud of. It's something that it's nervous. Probably one of the most nervous things that I've done besides stand up is putting one of these things out there in the world where, listen, there's a lot of personal stuff in there, right? And people can say anything they want, right? It's my lived experience and a whole bunch of other things, and just a fascinating process. And again, I've never given birth, don't want to, don't care to, um, but I'm pretty sure it's got to be close to giving birth. You hope this thing, that you've been, whatever, 150, 160 pages. You felt like you wrote 300 pages.
Yeah.
Um, gets received well, and you get some positive feedback.
Yeah. No, I appreciate kind of that walking us through that again, and it kind of puts it in the perfect place because I'd love to, if you're okay with it, I'd love to read just the first paragraph of the forward because it kind of sets the tone so that people know, what they're about to open. Yes, it's a leadership book. Yes, it's a business book, but it's also part memoir. And I think this is a really important part of kind of where everyone, leaders included, are right now. So, um, if you're okay with that, I'll read just
Yeah,
the
that'd be
first
great.
paragraph of the forward. Yeah. Um, so you start off by saying there's a moment in every leader's life when the story they've been living, the story of ambition, of achievement, of forward motion at all costs, it collides with the truth they can no longer ignore. Sometimes that truth arrives gently, like a whisper you realize has been calling you for years. Other times it comes like a phone call in the dark, a moment that splits life into a before and an after. For me, it was the latter. And though it took decades to fully process, it ultimately became the foundation of this book. So if you're okay with it, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that that chasm in life and that phone call in the dark because as you described the work that we did together, um, yes, it was, as you said, it was a little bit of editing, a lot of discussion. But one of the things that I felt really so powerful about this experience was it was also sort of grief tending. Like I got to sort of carry something um, that was very delicate and very precious in somebody's life, in your life, and your story. So if you don't mind
Yeah,
talking a little bit about that.
sure. I'll probably get a little emotional at some point, which is, it's always an interesting thing. But we're all a part of our experiences, right? And as you get older and your kids are growing, I think my last child's going off to college, right? And so, um, at some degree, right, that process of raising kids and being married and, those things probably are what most people count as successful, right? Versus how many podcasts you were on or how many zeros were beside your paycheck. All those things are great, right? Um, that first paragraph, the first time that story actually came out, I was, and told that in public, like, I don't even think I'd said a whole lot to to direct family members, right? And like some
Mm,
people that knew me really, really well had never heard some of that. And so I had been, we were talking about transformation. We were talking about AI. We were talking about how is AI impacting everything from what we do at work to how we communicate with each other to what creativity means to, um, how can it help us tell stories, right? And I had just come through this experience of trying to tell my story, and I had parts of it in there, and um, there was a two things, and again, I don't want to get too down in the weeds in it, but there's still kind of shaped some of the folks, of who I am, who ultimately this book came to be was, I think when my father was probably 56 to 58 in that time frame, which is, again, I'm still 42 as far as I'm concerned, but we're in that same age range, and
mm,
my father had taken his own life, and so the phone call in the dark was a phone call from my stepmother,
mm,
and my wife at the time was, I don't know, 5, 3, 4, 5, 6 months pregnant with our first child. And I remember we were coming home from, we were living in Rochester, New York, and we gone over to the IMAX theater. And I don't even know the movie. Like, my wife has asked me, and so like I couldn't remember what movie it was, right? And my
mm,
stepmother Alice had asked me, and again, they got my father and his wife at the time got remarried after, I was out in the world and working and doing things. And she said, "Hey, can you pull over? I need to tell you something." And I'm like, "Ooh, okay." And it's like 10:30 at night, probably. Like we actually used to stay out late, right? Maybe it was even later. Maybe it was 11, and we were in Skyline, New York, on the west side of town, leaving this IMAX movie. It's probably a Marvel movie or some other nonsense. And she told me that my father had passed away, and then we kind of talked briefly through that, and then he had taken his own life, and those are things, right? That you just, it's one of those things that'll take your breath away because that's not what you expect, right? Your
yeah.
whatever 57 to 60-year-old father to take his own life, and very bright guy, physicist, PhD, MBA, and as you think back on things, probably had a hard time at time connecting with people, and on a social level, not that it didn't happen, but there was an Aspergeriness to some of that, right? With a lot of really smart people, perhaps sometimes myself, I may not be the smart one, but you know, everybody connects with people differently. And so, that's a shock to the system. You're looking at your pregnant wife and, it was definitely upsetting. And then you put that in a box, right? And it's like, okay, life goes on.
Yeah.
Took some time off. We had a child, and then there's all of these things about, the life not lived and, wanting to see your first kid and, all this stuff. Right. And there had been some other, instances of similar situations on, my mother's side of the family, a lot of police officers in New York City and some really just, hard lifestyle, choices. Right. And seeing some of the things that police officers do. And, it's live hard and play hard. And yeah, there was I think my great grandfather, um, there was some of that stuff as well on that side of the family. And so we're talking about to bring it back a transformation, right? And so how does that stuff transform you? And I had written a letter to one of the leaders at Adobe saying, "Hey, I think there's an opportunity to take AI, right, and use this as a therapeutic option, right?" And I had kind of explored it, and I had "Hey, sounds like a nice idea. Go run this up through the product channel, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, okay, it's a big company. I got a million other things that I'm doing." And we were getting ready to go to an offsite, and my cousin's daughter wound up also taking her own life, right? 13, 14 years old, a lot of different things. You know, uh, and two other kids in the UK, right? They kind of had this suicide pact, and again, depression, a lot of ambiguity around a lot of things in life these days because we can be anything and anything except all the stuff out on social media and those kind of things. And I walked away from that saying, you know what, this isn't good enough. I'm going to try harder, and I bandied that idea probably for 4 months, and finally found a couple instances where there was another Adobe leader, and I'm gonna just leave some names out of it because some of it's personal. Somebody else in the education business who I reached out to, and I said, I really think there's something here. I'd love to do some sponsored research with, at the time, it was the University of Rochester because I had an existing relationship with, and done some work with their adolescent psychiatry group. And a lot of they had about a couple 100,000 contacts a year with students or with children that have suicide ideation. And so it was Dr. Peter Wyman and Ian. I'm going to forget his last name. I'll look it up. We can add it in the
Mm.
end. And I talked about it, and they said, there's an opportunity here. And so this leader at Adobe said, um, I also have had to deal with some children that have had depression. I've sat up at night, thinking about, is this going to be the night that if something happens to one of my kids or a family relative, and connected me with a couple of people up in social good and philanthropy. And, and at the end of the day, we wound up getting, a fair, couple tens of thousands of dollars for some sponsored research around this. And I got out and told the story at a leadership offsite. And, I was in tears telling the story. I probably start doing it now. But, I just put it out there, right? So how does AI help us? Well, here's how I used AI, and I felt like I can get control of some of this, right? I'm trying to help somebody else, right? So having children, they've had ideation, instead of just talking to an adult, talking to using their words, whether it be their voice or typing or written or whatever, to have a longitudinal study around, hey, how am I feeling today, right? So here's a picture that represents how I feel today. Here's a picture of how I feel tomorrow, right? And there's some real science around the longitudinal studies that take place around where there's intervention for kids that have suicide thoughts and adults as well. That first 48 to 72 hours is so crucial to have folks that they can talk to. And so I think for a lot of folks also in the military, right? There's a lot of military applications for this because
Yeah.
the military folks don't want to talk about, their thoughts and how they're feeling and what they're doing. And there's a lot more awareness around that. And you know what? I got up and I stepped in front of a group of, I don't know, under my peers, and I had like 8 minutes, and I start talking about here's what AI has done for me and helped me tell my story, and here's the end result. And it was a um, pretty powerful for me. There's people still down on their laptops. I'm sitting there fairly emotional, and I had 6 or 7 people come up to me. Some of them know me very well, some of them don't, and say, "That took a lot of guts to get up there and tell that story," And so
Yeah.
that was kind of like validation because I was on the front end of this particular kind of journey writing it. And that's kind of that synopsis of that first paragraph. And so that first paragraph really became one of the formations of what took place, right? And so I had not thought about that particular time in my life for probably 15 years. There's
Yeah.
some other stuff that happens in life, and as other parents pass away, and all of a sudden you're the oldest person, now in the family, right? You're the adult, and I'm like, man, I still feel like I'm 21 years old. I'm a kid, and I want to go do all the silly things that kids do, and I still have a lot of that youthfulness that I think maybe a lot of people that get to be our age do. But I still think I can dunk a basketball. I can, but I still play pretty good tennis and pickleball and ski and some other things. So that really was a cornerstone for some of the things that follow in the next 148 pages or so.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you walking through that and just thinking how much is packed in that single paragraph because it does kind of bloom into this incredible book and the stories and the vignettes that are woven throughout it. I think the other thing that you said kind of in the beginning, you almost kind of gave the analogy or the metaphor of like this is like birthing something into the world. And I am curious, Dave, like when you think about the aspect of putting your heart and soul into a book and knowing that it takes a lot of vulnerability. It takes a lot of um it just takes a lot of risk in a way to like put your story out there. Um and then just kind of trust that it finds who it needs to in the world. What was I mean, you described like the story kind of the writing came to you pretty easily, but then as you and I both know, it's sort of those last stages of something like this, right? The last mile, you've done running, I've done running, right? I think back to the days of running like the Army 10 miler. And I remember being um just so kind of like proud that I was doing it. But it's those last 2 miles that you're like, I just would give up, right? And the interesting thing is there's always somebody there that's like, "Hey, look me in the eye. We got a mile left. Look me in the eye. We got a mile left." Right? And
A-
and you get there.
And
So,
and you serve some of that. Sorry, go ahead.
no, no, I was just gonna say, reflect on that a little bit in terms of what this was like as a container for you, because um, it is it is blood, sweat, and tears to write a book.
It is the so any book, and especially in this space, right? Leadership, organizational behavior, AI, transformation technology. The good ones, listen, there's the top 100 stories you could talk about in business, right? But it's the human side of those stories that really leave a lasting impact, right? And what is our legacy, both in what we're doing today, how we impact, how we interact with others. I think that there's a million things that if I could go back 30 years, there's a whole bunch of things that I would change, right? But all of those mistakes and all those skin knees and bruises and risks you took, kind of make you who you are today. And this is like another one of those. This came out of we had relocated, we had made a decision. We knew eventually we are going to wind up back down here from upstate New York, and we balance our time between the two, and we still have lots of family and friends and relatives up there. We get back pretty regularly, but I had probably had the longest stretch of time to myself without people around in terms of,
Yeah.
immediate family members. And so I'd be down here for 2 or 3 weeks, and I was establishing my full time residency. And it started off with anybody that knows me well. I have yellow notepads, and they go with me everywhere. And sometimes I'm just scratching down things because it keeps me entertained. Um, I probably have a little bit or a whole lot of bit of ADD. I know that if I'm going to do any kind of work, I have to get up early in the morning, and I still get up at 4:30 most mornings, 4:35.
Yeah.
Earlier that I'm not going to get into because that sounds bad. 4:30 sounds great. Anything before 4:30, people start thinking like, I don't need a note. Are you one of those?
You're a little yeah, you're people start thinking you're a little nuts if you get up before 4:30.
Right. So 4:30 in the morning, right? Hey, I'm a go getter, but at 4, I have insomnia. So 4:30, I'm going to stick with 4:30, right? But
Yeah.
uh, the reality is that's my think time. And so I started thinking about the lessons, the reflections, and the stories, right? It kind of got me to where I'm at today because I had all this time. And that started off with a bunch of yellow notepads, just writing down random stuff. And anybody that knows me, I try to use self deprecating humor a lot, sometimes to good effect, sometimes not. Most of the time, there's a string of having some fun, usually at my own expense. Sometimes I'll, jab, a little bit with others, but I started just writing down all these jokes, and that turned into, literally 2 or 3 of these things. And I didn't make up every joke, right? These are ones I've heard, and I'd always tell. I was a ski instructor for 25 years, and so when you're dealing with people on the ski slope, they're facing challenges. You come up with lots of silly dad jokes. Anyways,
Yeah,
so I wound up doing this like stand up thing, and again, that's another longer story. I'll save for another. There's another book there. It really is.
for sure.
Suffice it to say, I'm like, I haven't written like this since I was probably in high school. Like I just haven't, right? I've been very time on task, edit done, next thing. And I just started writing down all these crazy things that happened over 30 years in technology. And so your original question was, right, how do you reflect, I think, right, on the whole process of writing a book? I'll
Yeah.
tell you the first, you know, task at the outline, the major stories and the vignettes, it's freaking fun. It's
Yeah.
easy because you're just doing word of mouth. And I wrote things down and I had people interview me and I recorded it and used some AI to record those things. And then I had the transcripts and I took the transcripts and transcribe them seriously by hand onto other yellow notebooks. And I had like 5 yellow notebooks, right? Front and back, chicken scratch. My writing is horrible in terms of penmanship. And eventually coalesced it into what I thought was a pretty good story. And that was like, seriously, like a year ago, right? And I had made a mistake, right? And so I will say, for other people going down this journey, the best thing you could tell people and the worst thing you can tell people is, hey, I'm writing a book.
Yeah.
Um, in retrospect, I would probably have kept a lot more of it to myself, other than a very small circle of people, because the question you get asked regularly, and you asked me too, and I had 2 people that know me fairly well challenge me and go, Dave, when the hell are you going to put this thing out? Right. And so I had what I thought was a book in the can at last June, like seriously,
Yeah.
last June. It was done as far as Dave was concerned. And then trying to go from that, okay, having I had some, 1 or 2 other people read, and there's somebody else that I worked with that Jalissa Jermosin, who's also now a published author. I think she wrote Latina Madrina. And we worked together, gosh, 30 years ago at Microsoft, right? In New York City. And
Mhm.
she went on to Salesforce and we hopped on the phone for like 15 minutes. And she says, this is, she'd read some portion of the manuscript and she's like, this is great, but it's missing the heart and the soul and, and you got to, what did it smell like? What did it feel like? And she
Yeah.
challenged me. And so, hats off to Alyssa if you're still out there. She's gone on to, I think, a full-time, writing and speaking career over the last couple of years, but really challenging me. So I went back and tried to put the feeling back into that, which meant I had to go relive a bunch of that stuff. And there was one of those occasions when we first started talking where I had to go really like dig deep on some of this stuff. And it was pretty emotional. I'll just, I'll
Yeah.
leave it at that. And so if I had to do it again, I would probably tell a lot less people that I was writing a book. Some of that was maybe for self-validation or a conversation starter or whatever. But, when you keep talking about it and you keep talking about it and you still haven't published the damn thing, it can really weigh on you. Like I had
Yeah.
someone take me out to lunch. He's a lawyer and a writer down here and say, the hell are you waiting for, dude? Just like put it out there. It's going to be
Yeah.
what it's going to be. And I'm like, putting it out there just, it wasn't good enough. And I still knew I needed more work. So that last 10%, it took me 8 months
Yeah.
on that last 10% or that last 5%. So it's a very challenging process. I probably would be much more closer to the vest on where I told people I was at in the process. Because the minute you throw it out there, then it becomes a question. Every time you see that person, hey Bill, did you finish that book? Hey Bill,
Right.
when am I going to see that book? Hey Bill, can I get a copy of the manuscript? No, you can't. I don't want to.
Right.
There's a whole bunch of reasons why you don't.
Yeah, it just becomes like another thing to manage as opposed to like, I mean, there's already plenty to manage. Let's be clear. Like when you're writing a book, and as you said, like even the research that you have to do, part of it is recollection, part of it is research, part of it is interviewing. One of the things I really loved about the experience, and I just have to name this because you were really the first person to kind of reach out to me with an ask like this. I think I had been kind of orbiting in this space. Obviously,
Yeah.
I had published 2 books myself. Um, but interestingly, in retrospect, I both those books sort of spilled out of me, right? I didn't go out in the world and tell people I'm writing books. They most people are actually kind of surprised. The first one was a book of poetry. People were like, "Whoa, really?" And then the second one, was an amalgamation of what started off as like LinkedIn thought pieces, newsletter. And then, basically I framed it and released it as a book. And so I think I had less of that pressure that you described. Um, but the other thing is, when you talk about pressure, it's been interesting on both sides because I remember when you reached out and said, hey, would you mind reading this? Like unvarnished, like just give me the real deal feedback. And I remember, we've walked a lot of hallways and we've been in a lot of spaces. And I remember thinking to myself, if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to take him for his word, I'm going to have to do it the way a veteran would talk to a veteran and no BS, right? Like no sugarcoating, no BS. And I remember um, typing that first email that I sent you back, and I remember kind of sitting at Justice Kennedy's desk in the Army Navy Club and typing this email,
Such a
and
great part for you.
I closed my eyes and I just typed because what was really interesting was the feedback, as you recall, um, was something along the lines of, "I feel like you're editing yourself out. I feel like you get the reader this close to the story that is within the story, and then you truncate it, or you stop, or you put like a complementary piece of research or an HBR article or McKinsey article, you put that there, and
Yeah.
I'm left sort of thirsty at every pass, and and I thought it was a really interesting thing that here I am typing this feedback to you, and I have to do it in such a way where I'm closing my eyes and typing because I didn't want to edit, right? How can I sit there and tell you don't edit when I'm at the propensity to sort of edit even the feedback I'm giving you, which says don't edit. And it was that was kind of the beginning of this really interesting thing, which told me, Bill, um, if you're going to do this, like do it fully, like lean in this experience with this other human. Um, and that's what I think really was kind of fascinating about this. And then on my side, to even be in a position where I was like, I have to go figure out what this is. Like I knew it wasn't just like, Bill, can you be an editor? Because a copy editor is very different. I've learned this, but this is where I called recently, just this week. Stewarding a story, right? Like you came to me, you trusted me with this very raw manuscript, um, which is not a small thing. I want people to understand, like that's not a small thing to be able to say, hey, there's this person that I sort of know, but like for all intents and purposes, we still never met in person.
No, but it's just,
Um,
I feel like we've been in the same room 100 times, but we never have.
exactly.
We're gonna
Like
change
people
that.
would we do have to change that, and people would be shocked by it. But at the same time, I think it's because we met in a meeting, like we connected in a place of vulnerability and like no holds bar, right? Like just hey, let's just like say it like it is, and let's go from that place, which is so refreshing, especially in today's day and age. But the other part, which I think was really interesting, was I had to then step into this uh, experience for myself, which was like, okay, Bill, you now get to be the steward and a little bit of a caretaker of this other human story. Um, like you said, it was pretty much done. But what role can you play to bring to life the other parts of this? And when I think back to how amazing it was, where you and I just had this first conversation, and you're like, "What would this look like?" And I'm like, I don't know. And you were like, well, what do you like to do? And I said, well, I do this podcast and I talk to people. And you were like, great. Maybe we do something like that. And what was really unique was you and I basically got on, I want to say 4 to 5 sessions.
Yep.
We're obviously both very busy. So we were conscious of each other's time. And I said to you in each session, I'll ask one very probing, open ended question, and you'll just talk. And my goal at the time was to get all of that, um, sort of that beauty and that extra divinity of your stories that I felt were there, but again, were a little bit truncated, or maybe they were on the yellow pads, but they weren't in the manuscript.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be such a great container, right? Just to allow you to talk. Um, and then, as you said, we use the power of transcript and a little bit of some of the tools inside AI transcribing to sort of suss out that part. And it brought to me a whole nother level and a whole nother lens on this story. And I'd be curious your reflection back on that because it was kind of like me saying to you, "Hey, trust me, I don't know what I'm doing here."
Ah, ah, you know, um, so listen, we've all, so, you were in the military, I was in the military, you were at Microsoft for a long time, we're both at Adobe, different roles yet similar. And none of these roles come without consequences, right? And
Yeah.
so when we talk about the things that we get, you also give and give up. a lot as well, right? And, nights, evenings, weekends, birthdays, anniversaries, first steps, on and on. I talk about some of those things. Sometimes we feel like those are choices.
Mhm.
Sometimes we feel like we're told, well, listen, we always have a choice, right? We always have a choice that you can say yes or you can say no. Those no's and yeses have consequences, right? Or you
Yeah.
can say no, but you can say it in a way that perhaps will get you out of the thing that you're kind of doing. But you have to reconcile those own things. And there's been a number of times that I've said yes to things that I shouldn't have. And I've said no to some things that I shouldn't have. And I didn't want this to be one of those things that I poured all this energy into and it never made it out into the world. And I was getting close. Like, again, there were some
Yeah.
things that happened, and just, you have kids, stuff happens. Like, I can't make up some of the stories. And so trying to get it from being in that container as you've used a few times to getting it out in the much broader container of the world was really, really, really challenging. Right. And so being able to say yes to trusting in somebody, right? Oh, we
Yeah.
trust everybody implicitly. Bullshit,
No,
right?
we don't.
You know, um, you probably know me better in some ways just because of this process than people that have known me for 30 and 40 years, right? Um, and so I think that first question you had asked was really around that first paragraph that you read. And if you recall, it probably turned into a 2-hour discussion. It
Did.
was you were at the time, I think we're on the West Coast, and it was like 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and, I was babbling away till 10:30. Anybody that knows me, I love hearing myself talk, good or bad, right? I'm not saying you do, Bill, but there are times that, I could speak less, but that's who I am,
Right.
and worked well for me, and being able to get some of those things out, there's a catharticness in that in much the same way as getting it down on paper and then getting it in a book and then having somebody read it or saying, "Hey, hey, would you be willing to, do an audible book on the same subject?" Or I've had folks that I haven't talked to in years reach out to me and say, "Hey, you know, I got your book," and I haven't been, promoting this super hard. I got a full
Right.
time job that's more than full time, like many of us these days. And, in the times that I've been traveling and the times that I've been at conferences, there's been a lot of nights that, yeah, there's an employee dinner, there's a group of customers, and I'll go and I'll do my bit for my role as an education leader and then
Mhm.
I disappear, and this is the stuff that I was working on, right? Trying to refine this stuff, and so much of it is you just get it up in your own head, and trying
Yeah.
to go from your own head to paper to having somebody else read it to hearing somebody else read it to, um, opening up that box, and it's like, hey, it's here. Um, and like even today, like I have a lunch with somebody today who I live down in the Hilton Head, South Carolina area, a chunk of the year. And guy's a PhD in organizational behavior. All I know is he's this dude that I play pickleball with. I don't know any more
Right.
than that. On some bike rides together. And he sends me an email or a text and goes, "Hey, I'd love to have lunch with you and pick your brain." And I'm like, okay, I've had a lot of these. What you trying to sell me insurance, investments? And he's like, as a PhD in organizational behavior, I taught at, the college level up in Maine. Um, and I'll tell you more then. And so I was actually just playing pickleball with a group of people, Odar Kunda this morning. And here's a gentleman who's wrote a bunch of stuff. He's
Mhm.
all these articles that he's published. And, again, as a PhD, right? He's got a doctorate. He knows way more about organizational behavior than I do, although I've lived a lot of it. And I
You
could say
have.
that I've lived 7 lifetimes given some of the companies that I work for.
Yeah.
I've had more jobs, even though they've been inside the same companies than 5 people, quite honestly. And, and so linearly, it's 23 years or whatever it was at Microsoft. But, it was 18 jobs, 18 discrete jobs with
That's right.
our trails. And so he started talking. He started asking me about how did you go from where you're at? Because I watch you, what you're doing, and I don't sit still very often. I just don't. Like,
Me neither.
where do you find the time to go do this and pull this stuff together? And so turns out he wants to pick my brain on how to get from having published papers and all these other things to writing a book and speaking about the things that you've done and learned. And so, it's just, it's a lot of fun when I get to this point, and it's still
Yeah.
nervous as hell, right? Like somebody said, "Hey, can you give me a copy of the book?" I'm like, you know what? No, I'm not going to give you a copy of the book. You can buy a copy of the book and I'm happy to discuss it with you after you reading. Somebody else gave me that advice, Bill, where
Yep.
I think it was you.
Mhm.
Um, it's like, you're a musician, right? Hey, you come in, we'll give you a free cup of coffee. I can go get a free cup of coffee. I don't need a free cup of coffee. Buy a copy of the book, right? And that's your support of the time and the effort. I will never, unless this shows up on the New York Times bestseller list, and I'm hopeful that it will. Unlikely, but um, the amount of feedback that I've gotten from people that I haven't talked to. I had somebody text me this morning from Europe and saying,
Yeah.
you know, my book just landed. They have a picture of it. There's another gentleman, Keith Partington. I think I made a little post on it, who he'd written his first book. I don't know, maybe 3, 4 years ago, and he sends me a copy on his laptop of the two books beside each other. And he's like, "Hey, here we are together again." And we spent 25 years working together, and those things kind of, it energizes you in a way that next sale, right, or the
Yeah.
next promotion just don't do. And so I really have come to enjoy it. I feel like I probably have another, like, there's 2 or 3 sections in this book that I'm probably gonna expand into,
Yeah.
some standalone things, right? And there's some people that have some stories that they wanna get out that, at times have been part of that journey, right? There's been some times, startups and some other things that I've been involved in,
Mhm.
and it's just it's like it's pretty cool. It's still, like, stressful to a degree when people write a review, right? And you're like,
Sure. Yeah.
you know, um some people are friends, right? And they write things, and then other things, you get, hey, if you pay us, X number of dollars, I'm an influencer, and my thing will help you. And, like, you know what? I don't need any of that, right? The validation in itself is just being able to get that out there, and then being able to speak. There's some causes that I'm involved with up here and down there, and a
Mhm.
lot of it's military outreach kind of things. A lot of student engagement, right? Just a lot of student engagement. So I would much rather any day I have a bad day at work, and they happen from time to time, right? There's stressful stuff that happens. You got to make decisions that impact people's lives, and being able to sit with that college senior, right, that you're doing
Yeah.
3 mock interviews with as they're doing a sales triathlon, and I'm pretty involved in the State University of New York, meeting with some muckety mucks who I'm just happy to be in the same room with in New York City. They're trying to do some things within the SUNY system, and, there's money involved, and people are granting, philanthropy and their time and their effort. It is just such awesome stuff to be able to have that platform where people are willing to listen to you. They value what you're saying. They value the collaboration that you've had with others, right? And the friendships that come out of those. And it's been a very daunting process at times. And then the last thing that I'll say on this whole process, and again, there's lots of stories in there, right? So I encourage your listeners to read it. Maybe we do a thing just about the books and the stories, and
Yeah.
kind of some of that versus the granularity of publishing a book. But man, there were a couple times that I'm sitting there literally getting things to upload to the publishing site, and I hit submit, and a format's off, and I spent a week, and so you'll hear me get excited, right? And so one of the publishing platforms out there is no human to contact, right? And so
No.
there are services that'll do this for you, and I understand why there's a service now. It's not hard, but the amount of attention and level of detail, and having the layout just perfect, right? And bleed over in PDFs and all this other stuff, had definitely some other help in the layout. And I was up at 3:30 in the morning, 5 days in a row, trying to get
Yep.
this service to sync with this service and ISBNs. And I finally was able to get past this one step, and I was getting, like, really nutty manic about it, right? I
Yeah.
want to be done with this thing. I need to be done with this thing. And, people and family are like, the hell are you doing up at 3:30 in the morning? I'm entering the same stuff again, and I'm hitting enter, and I'm sitting there like a knucklehead. Failed, failed, failed. And so I think I might have called you and 2 other people that had published books, and I
Yes.
said, "I'm stuck at this step," and they're like, "Just stop. Stop entering stuff in both places. Let it sit for 48 to 72 hours."
Yeah.
And, eventually the database is synced up, and we were able to get it. Then it's like, "Okay, upload." And I uploaded the manuscript, and I uploaded the cover, and guess what? They both failed again. Then I spent 4 more days back and forth with the layout person who is, family, relative, and we finally got it. And I'm like, "Great." Well, guess what? They rejected the first 3 I'm gonna change my wording, the first 3 times because we're off like 2 millimeters on the bleed over on the spine. And
Yeah.
finally, I took somebody's advice. Hey, there's a template, measure it exactly to that template. And then we were able to get it done. And I remember texting you. I'm like, holy, like, we got it to work. I'm so excited. I hadn't sold a book, nothing gotten done, but I finally got through this Byzantine, like it was a week and a half. I had
Yeah.
15 hours into getting this thing from a final transcript, final published copy. Learned a lot about InDesign, learned a bunch about some Adobe publishing tools.
Yes.
Um, till it finally said, okay, 72 hours, right? We have up to 72 hours. And I think I walked away. I had a big scotch or it was a
Yeah.
bourbon when that happened. And it was about 7 o'clock at night on a Friday. And I'm waiting all weekend, waiting all weekend. Then like Monday morning, you're like, hey, I ordered the first book, right? I think you ordered the first one because you were checking it pretty regularly. And I'm like, hallelujah. So, you know, I would encourage anybody, it's fun stuff. I'll continue to speak about a lot of the stuff in the
Yeah.
book. There's some other podcasts and some interviews and some other stuff that we have coming on. And, that's the next thing that I'm going to kind of have to throw myself up into. And fortunate enough at Adobe that we do a shutdown week.
Yeah.
And kind of from my Microsoft days, we used to have like these hackathon weeks or deep think weeks where, and so, in the process of that, I built an app, right, that's being used for Adobe. Uh, you know, kind of interesting. And I have to go through that internal Byzantine process to get that published on an internal website and some other stuff. But it's stuff around the education industry and connecting Adobe alumni to the schools that they went with. But also threw up a website and I played with GitHub and I played with all these tools that I just didn't do. And so Adobe Firefly, Adobe Studio, Claude Code, ChatGPT Pro. I played with
Hmm.
Gronk, and so again, it was like 4 o'clock in the morning. Here's Dave Pearlman. Well, he has family in town. Okay, I'm not going to take any time away from the family. But from like 4 to 10 every day while we were on shutdown, what am I doing? Right? I'm creating this new project for myself. Okay, I'm going to relearn code. I used to do programming. I got the stuff to work and publish it to GitHub and got a
Yeah.
website up and running that's pretty functional. I'm like, this isn't that difficult right now.
Yeah.
Again, I'm programming in my past, but um, I started playing with just some silly stuff, and all of a sudden now I have this side project that I'm working on to make a mobile phone app, and I'm not even going to get into it. I'm just going to say, what a cool opportunity, right? And one thing leads
Yeah.
to another thing, and I still can't sit still. Love we had the opportunity to talk about our shared experiences, and I hope that if people take the opportunity to read the book, feel free to reach out to me. I'm all over
Yeah.
LinkedIn. I'll respond to you. Love to hear what you think. Agree, disagree, don't like it. I don't put every opinion's great. Not all opinions you have to pay a lot of attention to. And I want to thank you too, Bill, for kind of helping shepherd this along. And a couple of times I was at the pointy end of the stick. Right? Come on, Dave. You got to come on. You got to just. I need more. And that or editorial development editor or
Yeah.
editorial
Developmental
or whatever
editor,
you're calling.
technical term. Yeah.
Um,
I
you
call it the
know,
steward. I'm a steward of a story.
there's this part right where we talk about I was doing this project and I think we had our first kid and very young, couple month old, and I had traveled on 160, 180 nights in 1 year. And I was running. If anybody's ever been to the Newark airport, there's a big Hilton, maybe it's a Hilton, maybe it's a Marriott now, and then there's a big Coca-Cola bottling plant or Pepsi bottling plant. And everybody that's been anywhere near Maplewood, New Jersey knows where it's at. And so for 9 months, I was there. Like I said, I was gone 160, 180 nights, and I was traveling globally as well. But that was kind of where the client was based. And I was working in Microsoft Consulting, and I was running out in this graveyard that's out behind there.
Yeah.
And I would run, 3 to 5 miles most mornings. And I got to the point where I had done this 3 mile loop inside the graveyard so many times that I started memorizing headstones. And when I say
Yeah.
I'm out there at like 5:30, I'm out there in the dark, I'm out there in the light. I think it started in the winter and went all the way through that fall. And I had memorized about 150 gravestones, the name, their birth date, and their death. And, I think there's a chapter in the book where we talk about, right, we're all going to have a headstone or something. There's going to be
Yeah.
two dates on that. And what do you want to do with your dash, right? What do you want to do with your story in between those two dates? And, some of the talks that I give really about that particular piece, right? So the first paragraph and there's some really powerful takeaways. I'm not going to be able to share them all here, but what do we want to do with our dash? We have
Mhm.
now 50 years, 60, 70, 80, 90 years, or less. What do you want to do with it? Right. And so, I would ask you, Bill, what do you want to do with your dash? And I think there's a potential maybe to have some side effort around being a developmental editor, you
Yeah.
know?
Well, and you brought that to life. I mean, that's the other part of this, which I find, and I encourage people to really kind of like listen to the nudges that come, right? Like had Bill Kerr sat down and said, "I want to aspire to be this thing," I think it would have come with all this pressure. I probably would have, signed up for all these courses. And sure, there's some technical stuff that people can learn, but the fact of the matter is, I think I learned more because you reached out and said, "Hey, um, I think I need help in this area. Would you be willing to give me some unvarnished truth?" Um, and I took it seriously. Like there's an analogy and a metaphor that a very good friend of mine uses. He basically says, "Do I trust someone enough to give them my garage code?" Right? Like for them to basically key into my garage and go into my house. And I mean, you essentially did that, Dave. You essentially said, "Here's my garage code." Like,
How can you help me clean up this thing? You know,
it's,
here's the tools, here's the power blower, right?
right.
It's time to go. But you know,
So
I
thank
I
you for that too.
I think, right, we've all gotten, listen, it happens every single day, whether it because of what I do for my full-time job, what I do in some of my part-time efforts. There are constantly people saying, "Hey, we got this thing, would you want to talk about LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever?" And so there's a lot of very disingenuous people in the world, right? They're trying to get your information, they're trying to do something, they want to take what you've done and use that to, you
Right.
know, make some money on some pass-through advertising, whatever it is. And I think you still need to put yourself out there. You need to be a reluctant skeptic. I don't know if that's
Yeah.
like you need to be you need to have skepticism about a lot of things, but at a certain point, you're either going to trust somebody or you're not, right? And
Yeah.
so as we get older, right, a lot of adults say it's harder to make friends, right, in your adult life. And when does an acquaintance become a friend, become a confidant? And so somehow we accelerated that very, very
Yeah.
literally within a month or two,
Yeah.
right? And so,
Yeah.
over the next 6 months, we're going to find a place that, you know, our spouses and partners can, all meet up and I'll buy a nice bottle of bourbon or wine or whatever. And, we can reflect on some of that. But, there's probably another whole piece and how do we form connections as adults, right? And so,
Yeah.
don't believe all the stuff that you see on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok, and you hear this from people, right? Listen, if you believed everything that I even put up on Facebook, um, there's never been a bad day. Nobody's ever had a skin knee. There hasn't been days where we've been in tears over something that's happened in the world or
Mhm.
the family, or we're stressed about stuff, right? People don't post a lot of the bad things that go on, right? And you don't want to hear that. It's the same way that you got to pick and choose where are you going to spend time with, who you're going to spend time with,
Yeah.
who are the folks that are additive, who are the folks that are subtractive. And listen, I'm not everybody's additive. I'll be the first one to tell you. There's some things that probably could have done differently. And you have friends for a time, a reason, or a season, right? And so I think that it's
Yeah.
what a blessing to be able to meet folks that have made a difference in your life, and maybe you've made a difference in their life along the way, right? So I feel blessed that we've been able to have that conversation, other conversations, and hopefully there'll be others, right, that we'll be able
For
to
sure.
connect in some of those same ways.
For sure. And before we wrap, I just want to say the other part of what you said, like, you know, people don't necessarily get rich writing books unless you get like Oprah or somebody comes and says, "Hey, this thing needs to be on this list," right? And even those are very like pay to play. Like, let's just name that what that is. But I do encourage people to think about the riches that come into your life from writing a book, right? And this is the part that I'm probably most excited for you, Dave, is like, this is just the beginning of what I've seen happen in really interesting ways these past couple of years, even for myself, is you'll get these very rich invitations or experiences or conversations that will just they will come to you in a way. And my encouragement for anyone listening is to think about the riches. Don't think about getting rich. Think about the riches in life that will come from writing your first book.
I've had, and I haven't even promoted this thing that hard, right? Sold a few hundred books in the first day or two, which is awesome, right? And over the next, we did a soft launch on Tuesday, and
Mhm.
I'm reaching out to some yeah, again, there's a standard path that you follow for some of these things, but the number of folks that have reached out to me and say, "Hey, would you mind signing a copy of this book?" And I'm like,
Yeah.
and so, like, there's another one, this morning, somebody showed up, and it sounds, like, so simple, right? And I started writing it, but I was sweaty playing pickleball, and
Mm.
somebody came up. I know them pretty well, but, I didn't tell them, "Hey, go buy 10 copies of the book." And they had gone out and bought a couple copies, and they're like, "Hey, would you mind signing one for me and signing one for one of my kids?" I read the first couple of pages, and it really, it really touched me in a way, and, I'm not gonna get into, and it's a side of you that I didn't know, and so it's happened a
Right.
couple of times, and that in itself would be enough, honestly. Like, if I didn't hear anything else from anybody, that would be enough, and then all of a sudden, all these people start coming out about, "Hey, how did you do this? How did you get, what'd you come up with the idea for the book? How did you get from that yellow pad with a couple words on it to where you're at?" And it's daunting. It's not simple. And so there's a number of friends that are in the process of also writing books, they've done some read throughs for me, and some of them take it like really mechanically, right? We're gonna I'm going to this reader's workshop and I'm going to go to 5 of these and I have a beta group of testers who are going to read my book and I'm going to take this feedback. And I'm like, that wasn't me, right? That was
Right.
just blah. And then I'm going to
Yeah.
have more blah. And then more people are going to give me feedback and I'll start taking away things and then I'll start adding back things. So I would encourage people, um, most writers, I think myself included, I guess, can I call myself an author now? I guess I can.
Yes, you can.
Um, an author, maybe I'll be an award-winning author. I have won awards, so I could still use the award-winning author.
Yes, you
Um,
could.
having that experience to talk to other people that are meaningful to you and that they connect with, there's something powerful about that, right? Whether you're a musician up on stage, a singer, a drummer, whatever, having that opportunity and having that immediate feedback when you're up in front of a room. And so, in a couple of days, right, I've had 5 or 6 groups that reach out to me to do some speaking gigs. A lot of these are volunteer, right? Hey, there's a group of folks that want to be writers. There's a couple of colleges that have reached out and said, "Hey, I'd love you to come in and talk about your experience." There's some professional opportunities as well, but a lot of that takes a guise of, there's an organization that I'll probably become involved with that's in the healthcare arena in the
Mhm.
coming months. And, it's an intersection of military, healthcare, kind of local community that we work in. It's a large organization. And like these opportunities happen because you put yourself out there, right? And there's going to be people
Yeah.
that are going to throw rocks and sticks and, oh, that's not, I know you when you said blah, 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 blah. Well, okay, that's great.
Yeah.
We don't have to chat. You don't ever have to interact with me. I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Here's where I'm at. If you want to meet us where we're at, I'm happy to talk about anything. But, we're not going to relive what happened 50 years ago. I can't do anything to change that. We can talk about what it looks like moving forward. And so, what a cool thing. I mean, honestly, what a cool
Yeah.
thing. Thanks again, Bill, for really,
Yeah.
challenging me and inspiring me in your own way as well.
Well, I appreciate it. And just so you know, I'm now in my second major developmental editing project.
Really?
So yours was the first. So thank you for literally that invitation and bringing me to this place where um, I'm really, really enjoying it. I'm really good at it. And I'm on my second major one. And it's for a gentleman who's publishing his memoir. It's kind of in the realm of healthcare and his story. Um, and and that's hopefully going to be coming out this summer or this fall. And I really like a year ago, I wouldn't have imagined that. And now here I am, like with this, but also there's this other one coming. Um, and it feels really powerful. It really does. So I thank you for trusting me. Thank you for letting me be part of the journey. Thanks for coming on and sharing your story. There's certainly more episodes to talk about this. I'm just excited for what's next for you and all those riches that are going to come to you, that you get to be very discerning on, right? Because as you said, um, now the magic is let the book surprise you. Let it delight you in a way of like the hands it will end up in, the stories it will change, the lives it will change. Um, you just get to sit back and kind of just be like delighted by that experience now because the hard work's done, my friend. The hard
Yeah.
work is done.
It's like, it really is, probably one of the more satisfactory things personally that I've accomplished in the last
Yeah.
number of years. Right. And so, certainly having kids graduate from high school and college and all those kind of things are awesome. We had a couple first, like my middle daughter brought down boyfriend for the first time, like, and spent 4 or 5 days with us during the July 4th week. Like, those are cool things that don't compare the same way, but
Mhm.
having others sharing in those lessons and reflections and stories, I use those 3 words a lot. Um,
Yeah.
Scary as hell, but a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So
It's
thank you.
really, really cool. You're welcome and enjoy the rest of your launch week. I'm sure we'll be chatting more as you do things, but for now, just sit in the gratitude. Like it's what you did is really awesome. And look at those yellow notebooks that you've got all around you. And just remember, like, it's never like the smallest little chicken scratch can turn into something that makes a difference. So thanks for trusting me. Thanks for sharing the story. There's more to come. And I encourage people to go out on Amazon and order it. I'll make sure that people have the link. And yeah, just congratulations again, Dave.
Thank you very much, Bill. Really appreciate it, and, thanks for your time and your listeners' time.
You bet. All right.